Thank you, everybody, for coming to our first Java with Joe for 2026. Thank you to everybody who came last year. It was probably our best attended season of Java with Joe. So this is something we do the fourth, in this case it was the fifth Thursday, but it's normally the fourth Thursday in the morning. We have some interesting presentations by local authors and historians and such on particular topics. So we hope to see everybody for the coming season. Thank you to Tim Horton for donating the coffee and donuts for 2026 again. So it's okay if you just come for the coffee and donuts. I wouldn't be but I hope you enjoy today's presentation. I will be talking about Robert Morris, as this year is our 250th as a nation. So I felt it only appropriate to start off with talking about a founding father that has a local connection. Robert Morris here. I call him West New York's founding father landlord. So his connection really lies in money, not in him actually being here, but we will kind of go through his life and connections. He is one of the founding fathers that often gets overlooked or underappreciated, and there's a lot more complexity to his story than I think ever really gets let on to. So we will just dive right in. So Robert Morris was born on January 20th, 1734, so we just celebrated a birthday actually, in Liverpool, England. So he's actually one of our early leaders that wasn't born on the continent. His parents were Robert Morris Sr., who was an agent for a shipping firm, and Elizabeth Murfitt. But it's speculated and almost entirely confirmed that our Robert Morris, was actually born outside of wedlock, which seems to be a family trait. And until he was 13, he was actually raised by his grandmother in England. In 1747, he immigrated to Oxford, Maryland, where his father was working the tobacco trade. And then 2 years later, he sent him to Philadelphia to live under the care of his father's friend, Charles Greenway. So basically, his entire childhood was not spent with his parents. And Greenway basically set Morris up first as an apprentice at a shipping and banking firm, which would become his long-term employment. That firm was run by Charles Willing. In 1750, Robert Morris Sr. died, leaving all of his estate to his son, and he used that money to good use. And Willing also became very impressed with Robert Morris Jr. And made him a key agent in the firm, basically at the end of his teenage years. So he started off very strong, and he even befriended Thomas Willing, who was Charles Willing's son. And when the elder Willing died in 1754, Thomas and Robert Morris became full partners in the firm, and it became known as Willing, Morris and Company. And it became basically the most prosperous trading firm in all of Philadelphia, which was the colony's busiest port at the time. So just to give you an idea of how well they were connected. And this firm, even going about 30 years later, underwrote the voyage of the ship Empress of China, which was the first American vessel to visit China. So their reach was global. So that is young Robert Morris on the left there at about this time. In 1769, at the age of 35, he married 20-year-old Mary White, who is over on the right there. She was the daughter of a wealthy lawyer and landholder in the Philadelphia area. They had 7 children together, the first born in that same year. And they lived on Front Street in Philadelphia, but maintained a second home known as the Hills, not Hollywood, right on the Schuylkill River, northwest of the city. And then they purchased another manor, which they named Morrisville, again, not New York, Morrisville, we're still in Pennsylvania, that was located right on the Delaware River across from Trenton, but on the Pennsylvania side. Besides these 7 children, he also fathered a daughter named Polly, born out of wedlock in 1763, just taking after his father. He supported Polly financially and remained in contact with her throughout her life. He also supported a younger half-brother, Thomas, who Morris's father had sired out of wedlock shortly before his own death. And Thomas eventually became a partner in the Morris shipping firm. And there are 3 of the Morris children that I don't have their names on the top of my head, but moving on. So Morris's residence became rather famous. In 1781, he purchased a home on Market Street, which was just 2 blocks north of Independence Hall, which was then the seat of the Second Continental Congress at the time. And he took it over entirely in 1785 and made that his primary residence. This was a very large domicile. In 1790, George Washington, who was president at the time, accepted Morris's offer to make the home his primary residence. And Morris and his family moved to a smaller neighboring property. So Morris's home became the presidential house. It was the first presidential home, and it was that throughout Washington's term and just about through Adams' term, because the White House wasn't finished until 1800. So the president lived in Philadelphia at Morris's former home on Market Street. So during the turbulent years leading up to the Revolution, Morris was definitely against breaking with England. And it makes sense because, well, he was a wealthy merchant who relied on the British trade network to make all his money, so breaking with that would hurt him severely. So he did not believe in breaking with England, but he was an opponent to the Stamp Act and some of the other quote-unquote intolerable acts. So he very much understood people's animosity towards England, but he did not believe it had to get to the point of revolution and independence. But he'd still protest. He would still join others in going out against British tax policies. About his objections, he stated, "I am a native of England, but from principle an American in this dispute." So that's kind of how he saw his relationship in all of this. He would decline to serve in any public office for a very long time other than the office of port warden, which was really just a figurehead kind of position. And he even let Willing become the face of the firm. He kind of worked, he was very good at working behind the scenes, not always as the face of the movement. He wasn't elected to the First Continental Congress, which convened in Philadelphia in 1774, but he frequently was involved in the congressional delegates and befriended a lot of those leaders that became the face, including Washington and John Jay. And he sympathized with the delegates who favored to reform policies versus breaking with England. So that's throughout his time in the public eye up until independence, he was one that was always looking to reconcile, for better or worse, or to find reforms to policies that would then allow them to stay with England. He did not agree with the policy, so he wanted things to change in order to maintain staying under British rule, but he did not always favor, his first choice was never independence. When the Pennsylvania Provincial Assembly was established around the same time, it made a 25-member committee of safety to supervise defenses against possible conflict. And Morris was appointed to that committee, and he became part of the core group of it, and was often sort of second chair when Benjamin Franklin wasn't available, which happened kind of frequently. And Morris was basically put in charge of collecting as much gunpowder as he possibly could, which becomes a theme in his time here. So he actually started a smuggling network to get gunpowder right from under the noses of the British, and was very good at it. Again, sort of a precursor. And due to that success, he became the chief supplier of gunpowder to the Continental Army once hostilities were formally engaged. And once this happened, he became more into the public affairs side. And in 1775, he was elected to the Pennsylvania Provincial Assembly, and then they elected him a delegate to Congress. He aligned again with those at the less radical fraction, and tried to push reconciliation, but I think he was always knew he was on the losing side. But he was appointed to the Secret Committee of Trade, which supervised all the procurement of arms and ammunition. So he's not, he wants to reconcile, but he's going to get all the guns he can to help us not reconcile. So you can see the dichotomy sort of what he's dealing with. And he was very good at basically providing all of the arms and armament for the Continental Army. He continued to represent Pennsylvania in the Continental Congress, and was even also selected to the Committee of Correspondence and the Marine Committee, so basically in charge of the Navy. He was then, in 1781, appointed to the position of Superintendent of Finance, so basically precursor to the Secretary of the Treasury. So he was handling all the financial matters of our new government until 1784. And a lot of that money was his own money. He also served as agent of Marine, which was basically the Secretary of the Navy today. He was in charge of the Navy. And he favored a very kind of prophetic naval strategy in that we can't confront the British naval forces in open battle because, well, we're going up against the largest navy in the world. So let's attack them where they're not and stretch them thin. So they attacked a lot in the Caribbean, sometimes in Canada, trying to draw British forces away from major areas and spread them out very thin so that they could then pick things off individually. He was also put in charge of the what was called the Model Treaty Committee, along with Franklin, John Dickinson, and John Adams. This was designed basically come up with a template for a treaty once hostilities ended, and that they could have relations again with Great Britain. I don't believe it was completely used, but that's what it was meant to put in place. And the big part of this was the concept of free trade, is that they were no longer beholden to British trade policy. They would trade with whoever they saw fit. And after the death of Samuel Ward, Morris was then the chairman of the Secret Committee of Trade. And in this, he set up agents across all sorts of colonies and ports around the world, basically trying to keep gathering supplies because they were still so limited. So on the screen we have Morris. This is kind of his most famous picture. This is at his time during Continental Congress. And on the right is several of his ships from his trading firm that are docked in Philadelphia that were doing a lot of the work. He actually set up his own privateering network as well, using his own ships to go after British shipping or to smuggle in supplies. So he had this kind of seedy underbelly, if you think about it. He was very good at breaking the law, even though he was often charged in making the law. So but it's something you'll notice.
Oh, really?
But that's basically the overall sort of mindset here of the Continental Congress is they're trying to make laws while breaking somebody else's laws. So Morris leaves Congress in 1778. Basically, he just needs to step aside. But he still sticks around for the delegation, and he's actually left as the lone opponent to independence in the Pennsylvania delegation, but they don't get rid of them even though they are pro-independence. And what they do is they actually excuse themselves from the voting of the Declaration of Independence, which allows it to go through. So he was not necessarily in favor, but he abstains basically and allows it to go through, and then eventually signs it. And when asked why he signed, he said, "I am not one of those politicians that run testy when my own plans are not adopted. I think it is the duty of a good citizen to follow when they cannot lead. And while I do not wish to see my countrymen die on the field of battle, nor do I wish to see them live in tyranny." So basically, I know we're going to go towards independence, so I am going to support it even though it's not what I felt was necessarily the best way to go. And he would rather support it than let see it fail. So he was, throughout the entire Revolutionary War, he was in charge of procuring most of the military goods for the new Army and Navy. His strategy was focused on using ships from New England to export tobacco and other goods to the Caribbean, and then use that money to bring in military supplies from Europe.
Chair. Next one down.
And he was also authorized to seek a formal treaty with France along with Benjamin Franklin, Arthur Lee, but he didn't end up going to France. That was left more to Franklin. And Morris was almost in the heart of the fighting when the British forces forced Washington back through Philadelphia and in that area. Morris was one of the few delegates that stayed behind and did not leave Philadelphia. He would also visit Valley Forge during that encampment, and he even got supplies specifically for the Battle of Trenton with Washington's crossing of the Delaware on Christmas in 1776. Basically, that was almost exclusively thanks to Morris's work to get him enough supplies to win that battle. Morris was away from Philadelphia for a time, so he did not participate in any of the discussion of the Articles of Confederation, which is really the first Constitution of the United States. But when he returned after that, he was instrumental in trying to get pensions and funding for the Army to pay the soldiers, because they were going extended periods, sometimes years, without being paid because there was no money. So it was left to Morris to kind of basically smooth that over and put him back into the Congressional Congress, and that's really where he was working from. Throughout the later half of his sort of political tenure, a lot of insinuations and charges get brought against him. The first time is in 1779, when he's accused of using his position as superintendent of finance to make himself money, even though most of the capital was his own money he was putting forward. But eventually that was dismissed. But there's this animosity towards Morris because, well, he is very wealthy, and not always knowing where the money was coming from made people very suspicious. He was also a founding member of the Republican Society, which was devoted to implementing a new state constitution in Pennsylvania. They favored bicameral legislation, so two houses, basically following a lot of what the United States government becomes. They tried to implement price controls in the Philadelphia port, and basically merchants started getting arrested for violating the committee's orders, but Morris didn't, and he emerged as an opponent to the committee. And this led to almost outright riots in Philadelphia, where Morris and other members actually had to be barricaded in their homes to protect them from rioting Philadelphians until the local militia could come in and sort of bring order back. Many people had to flee the city, but Morris again stayed behind and was able to sort of rise above it. It was at this time that he started to work towards larger merchant networks, and basically formed the first national conglomerate, as it's put, with Jonathan Hudson of Maryland and Carter Baxter and Benjamin Harrison of Virginia. He also helped create the Bank of Pennsylvania, which was really the first state government-backed bank, and they provided a lot of supplies through that. Basically, it just accepted deposits and then handed out loans. It didn't do much more than that. But this put him in the state legislature, and this sort of was a stepping stone to one of his big accomplishments, and that was the Bank of North America, which was the first congressionally chartered national bank in the United States. And very much like Hamilton and others, he believed that there would be no financial stability without the ability to levy taxes and tariffs, which the Articles of Confederation did not allow. So he set up the Bank of North America as a way to help mitigate that. They would take in deposits and then provide loans to Congress and issue banknotes. He was hoping that it would help finance the war, but it doesn't really take strong effect until after the main part of the war is over. In 1781, he's presiding over the issue of new currency, which is called Morris notes, which was backed with his own funds. So Robert Morris is almost solely supporting the new United States. So in 1782, the bank actually commences operation, and Morris tries to grow this into a national mint with a single coin. So all the things that we have today, the first person to actually promote it is Robert Morris. And a first decimal currency, but Congress isn't willing to do any of that. So he brings on help to kind of get all these things through, and one of them is Alexander Hamilton. He sort of put them under his wing in that way. And by the end of this, he issues his report on public credit, which was his economic plan for the full payment of the country's war debt through revenue measures. This included a head tax on slaves, but he pushed for a federal tariff of 5% on all imported goods, which would require an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, so it didn't go through. Morris was still continually trying to pay the soldiers from the Continental Army because there was a lot of back pay due. This led to several crises with soldiers sort of revolting. There was one called the Newburgh Conspiracy, which people believe Morris was at the head of, but turns out he wasn't. But because he can't get any of this through, he decides to leave Congress and decides that he wouldn't be the minister of injustice, and offers his resignation. But they convince him to stay on for a little while longer, for another year as superintendent of finance, which he eventually leaves in 1784. And they don't replace him, they just make a 3-member committee of the Board of Treasury. By the time of the first Constitutional Convention in 1787, Morris is brought back to be a member of the Pennsylvania delegation. Again, he tries to keep pushing through his ideas, and he has more success this time. When Washington is elected president, it's actually Morris who he tabs to be his Secretary of Treasury. Which made a lot of sense because Morris had basically been doing the job for about 10 years at this point, and knew as much of anyone about how to make this happen. But Morris declines, and he says, I know this guy who's been working with me, you know him too, but Alexander Hamilton, and that's why Hamilton is the first Secretary of the Treasury. It wasn't Washington's first choice, but with Morris's recommendation, that's how we get Hamilton where he is. Morris basically supports Hamilton's economic program because, well, it's probably what he would have done in the same position. But the only difference is Morris differed with Hamilton on where the national capital should be. Hamilton wanted to keep it in New York. Morris wanted it in Philadelphia. That's just where they both lived, so it made sense. But they, he was willing to compromise and all that, and that's how we get our major compromises on state debts and position of the capital. If you know the Hamilton musical, The Room Where It Happens, that's where that all happens. So, Morris also helped Pennsylvania gain control of the Erie Triangle, so that is the part on Lake Erie, where Erie, Pennsylvania is. That was not supposed to be Pennsylvania, but they convinced it so Pennsylvania would have a freshwater port. And he goes on to sign the Constitution. So he's one of 6 men to sign the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. His sort of political career kind of, he starts to leave that behind and focuses more on his business interests. And his main occupation is land speculation following the Constitutional Convention. And his first major deal is right here in Western New York. He first purchases the eastern portion of the Phelps-Bourne Purchase in 1790, which was basically what was left over. So sort of the eastern portion just past the Genesee River. And then he sells that to the Pulteney Association under Sir William Johnson Pulteney. And he uses that money to then buy the western part, which is the part we live in. So he ends up purchasing 3.75 million acres west of the Genesee River, which becomes known as the Morris Purchase in 1791. But he never comes here. He buys 3.7 million acres worth of land sight unseen. I can't imagine anybody buying almost an acre of land now without seeing it. So, and he is purely looking to sell it to make a profit. So that is where he runs into Casanova of the Holland Land Company in Philadelphia. They start talking, and between 1792 and 1793, they strike a deal to sell 3.25 million acres to the Holland Land Company. That's where we end up. But Morris was actually the first, well, technically the second owner of that. He keeps 500,000 acres known as the Morris Reserve. This was the easternmost strip, which ran the entire length, and that would be sold off piecemeal over the next few years for a very particular purpose, because at this time Morris is the richest man in the United States. That is going to soon change. So some of his business ventures. He founded several canal companies, 2 in Pennsylvania that didn't really work. A lot of his shares in buying land, he bought millions of acres in Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Virginia, Georgia, Carolinas, all under the North American Company, as it was called. So they owned millions of acres in Pennsylvania. They owned property in Washington, D.C., throughout the southern states that they were trying to sell off. And unfortunately, a lot of those ventures didn't come to pass. His partners bailed on him, were sometimes arrested for either forgery or passing bad notes. The North American Land Company, at its largest, owned more than 6 million acres. And this was valued at about 50 cents an acre, so they were still, the land was valued at about $3 million. But eventually, all the partners bailed or were put in prison for their own debts, and Morris is really left holding the bag and is not able to recover. In 1796, he had to mortgage the Morris Reserve, 100,000 acres of it, and that was called in. He failed to pay it, and they foreclosed on him, and that was sort of the beginning of the end. He couldn't even pay his servant the $500 that was owed by the end of it. All of his homes were put up for sale and auctioned. At his last property, he literally ran to his country home to escape his debtors, and they followed him to his gate. And all that was ended up being left in that home was a bed, some clothes, and a little bit of food. Everything else was sold off. The Morrisville property, which was named Summerseat, sold for $41,000, but that was unable to really pay off anything. So in 1798, Robert Morris is sent to debtor's prison. He was worth millions, and now he doesn't have a penny. And he's kept in debtor's prison for 3.5 years. He's eventually released in, so yes, there's a small map of the eventual Morris purchase and some of the things that he was signing in terms of the notes and stuff. But in 1801, he is released, but only after Congress passed the Bankruptcy Act of 1800, which changed how bankruptcy worked in the United States. And this act was created to get Morris out of prison. So Congress said, this guy basically funded us for a decade on his own. We should probably do something about this. Well, that was the feeling. As a debt of gratitude, they changed the whole bankruptcy code to get him out of prison. So it's tallied that his debts when he is released from prison were $2,848,711.11. In 1801, that is certified, 2/3 of his creditors agreed to discharge on Morris, and bankruptcy was confirmed, and basically he's left penniless for the rest of his life. He dies on May 8th, 1806 in Philadelphia. There are no public ceremonies, and he is simply buried in the churchyard of the church that he attended. So really an influential member of our very beginning years, and we probably don't succeed without him, and he goes out without any fanfare at all, which really does carry on. But there is some things to point out to his legacy. His portrait appeared on the $1,000 bill from 1862 to 1863, so if you find one of those, that's worth a lot of money now.
More than 1,000?
Yes. And a $10 silver certificate from 1878 to 1880. You have Robert Morris University in Pittsburgh and Robert Morris University in Illinois. Mount Morris in our area, named after the family. His son Thomas came up here to represent Morris during the Treaty of Big Tree and ended up staying and settled in several places around western New York, mostly Allegheny and Wyoming County, but we do have Mount Morris dedicated to him. There's a number of ships on the Navy and the Coast Guard, kind of fitting since he was our first sort of head of the Navy. The USS Morris and the USRC Morris. You have Morrisville, Pennsylvania. And there's a statue, that's the statue on the right there of Morris at Independence National Historic Park in Philadelphia, which has Morris and others. He also has one in Chicago, and his estate Morrisville is listed on the National Historic Landmark, along with some other properties. One area that he used to own, where the president's house was, the house no longer stands, but that is now called Liberty Bell Center. That's where the Liberty Bell is now situated. That was where Morris lived, and that's where Washington lived for a time. And so Morris holds the curious distinction that he is the only founding father whose house is a national memorial. Seems odd with all of the other figures, but that is how it was set up. But his life is not interpreted at the site. So it is all about the Liberty Bell. It is not about Morris, but it is on Morris's property. but he is included in the memorial to the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence in Washington, D.C. So Robert Morris is, even during his life, was somewhat overlooked in his accomplishments and how he contributed to the revolution, because really without his backing, probably nothing succeeds in a sense. And he was looked to solve a lot of problems and wasn't really given the thanks in the end, except for getting him out of prison. But he's very much an overlooked individual, but he is sort of our founding father. We have Robert Morris School here in Batavia. When the land office was dedicated in 1894, they made a big deal about Morris's connection to it, even though that's basically he just sold them the land. He never saw this building, never knew it, but that is sort of a major connection to that through Morris and Western New York. Thank you, everyone. Any questions?
But was he a Mason? Was he a Freemason? Do they have any record of that?
I want to say he was because pretty much all of them were.
They all were.
So,
We'll talk later.
yeah. I didn't find anything. I also wasn't looking for it, but I would be very surprised if he wasn't. So, yes.
Did he have a public position on slavery?
So part of, while he was a merchant, they actually did do some slave
I figured.
trading.
I just wondered if he had a personal position.
I didn't see anything that said either way, but he did actually help petition to get slaves to be imported to Philadelphia, which they were not allowed at the time.
We'll go with pragmatic businessman.
Yes, I think that's, I would say he probably wasn't against it, but he was looking at it from a purely business perspective, I'm guessing. Because he did have servants, and I think he had a couple slaves himself, but he would have basically been fitting in with the times.
Yeah.
He didn't necessarily have a public position on it, at least that was openly stated.
And you toured that house in Livingston County, the one that Thomas lived in? The father never lived there, correct?
Correct. He never came to Western New York. I don't think he really ever left Pennsylvania. He was having people buying these properties for him. So when it came to selling the land formally, yes, he sent his son to do it because he was dealing with his own debts in Philadelphia and couldn't really travel. So yeah, that would be Thomas, his son, who came up here.
Can you tour that house?
I'm not sure on that one, so.
I'll check. And did he purchase the Morris tract from the natives?
No. He purchased it from the state of Massachusetts. What ends up happening is he does end up giving the Seneca money, but that is sort of after he sells it. So it's really in conjunction with the Holland Land Company when that happens. So when he takes it over, he is not buying from the Seneca. They do that at the end, really. The money he gives, it goes straight to Massachusetts in the beginning. So.
Thank you.
You said he owns land in Washington, D.C. Is any of that land part of our national government?
No, this was residential. They had plots basically that they had bought up after the district was laid out as a way to try to make a quick buck on people moving there. And it didn't state which area specifically, because I was I'm guessing it was kind of scattered throughout. But yeah, it was just trying to purchase plots so that they could sell them and make the money off of it.
The land was already laid out for the capital and.
So at least the boundaries when they're working, and they're probably, because it's actually Andrew Ellicott, Joseph's older brother, who finishes that. So they're working on that, and once they get that, they are one of the first ones to jump in and start buying up pieces. So.
Who's the first basketball?
Where was he held in debtor's prison?
It was in Philadelphia, at one of the major prisons there. because that's where they all of his buddies kind of ended up there at one time or another. All of his business partners. Some tried to flee and ended up other places, but that's where he was held. Basically, the idea being he's held until he can pay things off, and he never was going to be able to pay it off. So without the Bankruptcy Act of 1800, he probably dies in prison, based off of.
So Thomas Morris was at the Big Tree Treaty?
Yes,
Was he a signer in that document too?
yes. So he is the representative of the Morris estate.
Okay.
So the Big Tree Treaty really has 4 components in terms of who's signing things. You've got the Morris estate, which is Thomas representing. You have the Holland Land Company, which has Ellicott and Casanova, and then you have the Seneca, and then you have the Wadsworth representing the United States, basically overseeing this. So it's not truly a treaty between 2 entities, it's kind of 4 entities all agreeing on something at the same time. But since Morris was a legal owner, he had to sign over to the land company with basically the Seneca's agreement to that.
Where'd the money come from for the Big Tree? Was it Morris or?
Yeah, Morris is really the one bankrolling all this at the time. But they've already made an agreement between him and the Holland Land Company on that sale.
Okay.
So money's already pretty much being transferred. This is sort of just like tying up the loose end to make it formal.
Alright.
So,
Closing.
yes.
Outside of Thomas, or any of his progeny, did they go on to do much for him?
It doesn't appear that anybody else is really in the spotlight in any way. And part of that is because the family financials go in the toilet. So the next generation really doesn't have much to play off of in that. They kind of drift into obscurity.
How many sons did he have, do you know?
I want to say it was 3 sons, 4 daughters. And they, go on and do their own things. Another son, they get into their own trading businesses and things like that, but they don't reach their father's heights in terms of involvement in the national scope. I saw Rachel's hand first.
Why did they change the bankruptcy laws instead of just pardoning him? Would that have been possible, or?
Well,
Trick question.
I think it's a very good question. I think because they were also seeing sort of, it wasn't just because of Morris, but he was sort of the poster child. I think they realized that they're going to have a lot of people go into this kind of debt, and they weren't. By having them in debtor's prison, you're not collecting. They can't pay anything off. So it was looking at sort of the financial system anew, because there was a lot of people that ended up losing a lot of money from the revolution and never got it back. And those people were prominent citizens, Morris being the most prominent and got in the most trouble with it. So I think it was also kind of looking ahead, saying this is probably going to keep happening, so let's do something different. But Morris is the poster child of it. So.
Is the Tennessee River the eastern border of his purchase, did you say?
Not perfectly, but yes. that's the landmark to use for it. That was basically, so the original Felsgorm purchase was the whole thing.
Oh.
The whole thing. And they were only able to pay off up to a certain point. Morris buys the rest of it, which was somewhat on the eastern side, but all of the western side. But then he sells off the eastern half right away, and then the western half goes to the Holland Land Company. So that's the general breakdown. The Genesee River is not a perfect, it's because the preemption line is really what the boundary is. But if you are west of the Genesee River, you are most likely in the Morris purchase, not what becomes known as the Felsgorm purchase. So. Yes, Mary?
So who's keeping track of all these land sales? Because if Massachusetts starts and has all of this land, and then they default on payments and stuff, now who's keeping track of, oh, okay, this started here, it's not here, so how do you end up saying, now I'm getting it, and none of it's been surveyed yet?
Well, it had been surveyed. Not well, but it was surveyed. They knew where boundaries were at the very least. So we really got a transition of ownership and thus a transition of the responsibility of data keeping. So our first sales are state of Massachusetts issue. So they have to document who's buying, how much. Once it's paid off though, it becomes a New York State issue because it's now part of New York State. So New York State is now keeping track of that. And then the federal government has to keep track, basically just saying this happened. They're not necessarily keeping track of any money exchanged or anything. Then you've got, Morris has to keep track. So it is, every entity has to keep track of it, and then you have to piece it together at the end.
The question is, were some of these purchases before there was actually a federal government?
Yes, in the sense of the federal government that becomes established. So the Phelps Forum actually happens post Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, but the federal government doesn't really isn't established with powers yet in order to maintain any of that. So it's still the state's responsibility doing a lot of the things that we assume the federal government does today. It was still the states doing all of it. And all of those land purchases are not dealing with the federal government. They are state and private ownership. So the federal government just wants to know that they're happening as they should. That's all they really care about. They're
You
not.
say state, but you mean colonies. It's-
No, we are states now.
They are states.
Yes. So this is 1788 is when we start, so they are states now. There was talks of it when they were colonies, but it happens when we're states. So.
Was
Yes.
the Massachusetts sale a private individual or was it the state?
So the state sells it to private individuals.
The state sold it. and
Yes.
then- Okay.
And then that's why it goes back to Massachusetts when they default, and then they sell it again to a private individual.
Okay.
It's complicated. I'll make a flow chart at some point. Because I am not an economics professor, so I'm trying to figure this out sometimes. Yes.
Any cinematic or theatrical representation of his life?
Yes, he is. I want to say he's featured in some of those things, but not in any prominent role. He's sort of a background character. And in some ways, I think he'd prefer that, because he always liked to be behind the scenes, not the guy out front. And so, but no, there's not been anything really done about him in any cinematic way.
I can provide some insights in that.
Sure.
He looks way too much like Benjamin Franklin and totally confused the audience.
Probably.
I'm sorry, I'm a writer and producer, but it's probably exactly it. And also Benjamin Franklin is a significantly more famous person.
Yes.
So yeah, it would be very confusing to him.
Yeah, I want to say, he'll be at least mentioned in a lot of those Revolutionary era things, because he was involved in all of that. All these guys knew him. I mean, let's see.
I don't think he's mentioned at all.
No, but that's,
Not even
I'm not, so this is actually, in DC, and this is Morris right here being Mercury giving him the money.
Yeah, but that's Mercury.
Yeah, so he's being delivered from the gods of the salvation of the United States. So he does get a little bit, he does get credit, but I think if you went out and asked people about, Robert Morris, the founding father, they'd probably look at you like, who are you talking about? So just trying to shed a little more light on him and his importance to this, and obviously the local connections. Yes?
We have Philip Morris Tobacco Company Company, is that the same Morris?
Not that I'm aware of any descendant or anything. Yeah, there's a lot of Morris businesses, and I don't think they can actually trace their connection, because I think they're just, because there's also Gouverneur Morris of the Revolutionary era, who was very good friends with Robert Morris. They are not related. It's just Morris and Morris. They wrote a lot of defenses together, but not related, so. Yes.
What happened to his wife?
Well, she kind of gets caught up in all of it, and, you know, her family had money, so I think she was able to kind of fall back on that with the kids, at least to protect themselves a little bit. And you have to remember, she's not carrying these debts, it's him. So she is left without the money, but she is not responsible for paying it back. So she is able to, if she can find other income or other family who can take her in, and that's basically what she does, is she goes, she's stayed by her side. So, but that is, yeah, she has no legal responsibility in any of this, because Morris is solely carrying these debts. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you for listening to me today. PSA for upcoming events. We are now officially back open, so tell your friends. But next Wednesday, the 4th, we're doing our first night museum. We'll be open from 5 to 8. We're going to do a museum scavenger hunt. Our next trivia is the 12th at 7, and we'll be doing it on George Washington. Our first guest speaker of the year will be on Friday the 13th. Dieter Smith, who is a local resident from Alabama, or Oakfield, will be talking about her life in the South growing up in honor of Black History Month. Then we have another guest speaker, Joe Biscaglia from Williamsville. We'll be talking about Williamsville in the War of 1812 on February 19th. And then our next Java with Joe, Rachel Bellis, our new curator, she just stepped out, but she'll be talking about morning dress and drapery at the White House, which she did an online exhibit for the White House as an intern there. We have 2 new exhibits coming up in February. A new art exhibit featuring the works of Anthony Terrell, and that's why we have a bunch of easels out that will be going up. And Rachel has hard work on crime and punishment in Genesee County, which, if you walk through the West Wing and saw it all kind of disheveled, that's what's happening. So should be up within the next week or so. So definitely want to come and check that out. And we've redone our military exhibit now in the front room, so you can check that out too. So a lot is happening and changing. So we hope to see you guys throughout the year. So thank you.